thanks everyone for joining. And a brief intro to myself. I started my career with a startup. We grew from 5 to 500 within a few years. From there, I moved on to the corporate world. So I had the opportunity to lead the UX teams in a couple of the investment banks here in London. So today I'll share some tips from my experience. And hopefully we'll have a conversation on how to manage UX. Before I start, I wanted to kind of understand the audience as well. How many of you guys have management responsibilities or manage others right now? Oh, quite a few. That's great. Okay. And how many are aspiring or would like to get into management in the future? Okay. A bit more, okay, and I guess we have people who are not interested as well. So hopefully this will have something for everyone. I'll be very keen to hear the perspectives of other managers, and I've structured it more around people aspiring to be getting on the management style, but also it answers questions for those who do want. Hopefully you'll see some more insight on is it really for you? Because there is an aspect of desirability to management, which is not always covered in reality. So what the structure will be, I'll start with my own journey. I think there are no hard truths in management, so there isn't a single way to do this right. It will have to be something that works for you and that works for the organization you're in. So take this as my tips, what worked for me and the organizations I was in, but certainly don't take this as something you should follow. Then I'll outline my tips and advice for you on how to get on the journey yourself. What does it take to get to the management role, and how you can be a good manager. And hopefully we'll get some Q&A as well. Okay, so I'll start with my own journey. And it started in a very unlikely place on the Black Sea coast of Bulgaria towards the end of the communism. And I was heavily interested in mathematics at school, and then that followed in a degree with economics and business in university. So I was really not going into the design direction at all. But what I did have in terms of personal interest was a very keen interest in creativity and design. So I was doing on the side just the random Photoshop, CorelDRAW at the time, just projects for free. And that got me into helping out the local, the university radio, and I did their website. On the back of that, the university was then redesigning their website and asked me to help. So I redesigned the university website. And on the back of that, I got invited to my first job. So this is my first tip for you. Take initiative and do things for free. I still do this to this day. That's how I started my career, by just following up on my hobby. And that's what's been driving my development since then as well. As a designer, I only have opportunities to work on certain projects that I get exposed through my workplace. But as a creative, I have much broader interests. So I will have interest in conversational design, in bots, things that I don't really do at work, and those things I would love to do for free. So I still get involved. There's a Catchify, is a great website where you can donate your time, and you can just do charity work for other charities and NGOs, helping with your skills, and also expanding your own creative environment and your skills as well. So certainly a great tip for me, don't be shy to do things for free if they will contribute to your training, if they will open up new opportunities for networking and for expertise. That's certainly something of a benefit for you. So the company that invited me to work for while I was still in university was kind of like a startup from one of the largest organizations at the time in Bulgaria. And it was a huge conglomerate of interests in the financial sector, hospitality, constructions. So at the very tender age of, like, I was 21 or 2, I was doing whole retail systems for a bank, supply chain management systems, hospitality front-end systems. So I had the opportunity to work on really massive projects at the time when I was still in school. So that goes to my second tip for you. You can start small in a big place, or you can start big in a small place. So at the time, Bulgaria was really lacking all the know-how for digital technologies. We were just transitioning away from communism, so a lot of graphic designers were still working on paper, and literally no one had the digital expertise. So big companies, realizing the potential there, had to turn to well, schools and universities to get the talent. So I was just very lucky to be at the same time, at the right time in the right place. So I had that exposure to fantastic, really interesting projects, things that I would have taken years to get access to in London, for example. So what I have here is kind of like a matrix of what you would consider whether, when you're considering how you should approach your growth strategy as a personal career. In a big place, say London, you would have access to world-class expertise. So when you get on your first job, it might be a junior job, but you will learn very quick. You will have your peers to learn from, a fantastic environment that presents opportunities for advice and for mentorship. And then you will likely learn the best practices from world-class experts. That also comes, sadly, with a very clear career path. So all of those experts are already working in those senior roles. So climbing up the ladder, we all know, is a very staged experience in London, and it's certainly not a quick one. In a small place, you can jump really fast up the hierarchy. So what I had back home, I was working on incredibly complex projects because there was just no one else there. So small place meaning that there isn't that much competition, so you can shine through, but then there's no one to learn from. So really you're on your own, and you have to, if you want to grow, you will be given the opportunities, but you have to train yourself. You have to figure out on your own how to do the work. And for me, that's less and less of a problem these days. With the internet, you have access to world-class designers sharing their ideas, their process, their outcomes. So there isn't really an excuse for you to not do world-class design on your own. But it's not the style that fits everyone. So you have to kind of decide which one works better for you. And I think both can work really well. But it's certainly something you might want to consider if you're actively designing your career path. So next time someone calls from Dubai and offers a job, consider this. So I had some good years designing those complicated projects in that massive organization. And then I graduated. I got an invite from friends of mine who were just setting up their own company. And I had that trade-off now. Do I join the startup, or do I stay with my safe corporate job? And the advice I have for you there was the follow talent. So I jumped board and I joined my friends for a fantastic journey of growing a startup, like I said, from 5 to over 500. The place was called Telerik. I don't know if you've heard the name. We were rather big on the user interface components front a few years ago, and now with the HTML5 scene, I think it's becoming less and less relevant. Third-party controls are becoming a thing of the past, I believe. But at the time, it was a fantastic journey, and it was certainly the right choice for me. What led to that choice was really this role: follow talent. And that's one thing I would certainly recommend you consider when you're in a position to choose between roles. So a lot of people are talking, am I the corporate style or am I the startup style? And I would say, yes, there are personalities that are better suited to one or the other environment. But if you're looking for growth, you can get growth in both directions. But you need to make sure that you're sticking with the right team. And that means look out for the hiring managers. Do they have the vision that you trust? Do they have the talent and the team in place to realize that vision? And that's something that you can see in a startup, but you can also see it in corporates. Certainly a lot of the big organizations here in London attract talent, even if it's just through remuneration. So you would get bright designers everywhere. So really don't think corporate versus startup. Think, is this a good group of people? Will I grow with them? And that's what hopefully will land you the right opportunities for growth. So I had a fantastic time with the startup, doing the fast growth journey. And at the end of it, I was managing a team of probably 10, both designers and developers, becoming a rather administrative job, and with the organization growing, also getting a lot of politics around it. So I thought it was a time for me to change and follow my creative call. So I came to London to study. I did my master's here. And my next advice for you, experience trumps education. If you're looking for education as a means to land that managerial job, it's not how it works. Some management positions do have as a requirement some formal education, but it's a requirement. It's not something that will drive the hiring decision. And certainly, I've hired a lot of designers through my life. I've never based that decision on education. With design, it's so obvious. You have a portfolio, and the strength of that portfolio is always what drives the decision making. And now you don't even trust portfolio these days because the design is such a collaborative project these days. Showing a portfolio doesn't necessarily guarantee your role within that project, let's say. So most people use really just exercises and interviews as a workshop method for checking out your value as a designer. So really that's what drives the hiring. It's not your diploma. But if you think of school as a platform for you to build your skills and to build a portfolio, then that can be a very successful endeavor. So certainly don't discount education as something you shouldn't do, but don't think of it as the bullet to a better job. It will give you the tools, if you use your time wisely, to get a better job, but just the diploma on its own is not particularly helpful. So I was graduating towards the end of, the beginning of the financial crisis, 2008-9. So it was really a tight market here in London. Not much in the way of new IT design projects. So I was lucky enough to land a job almost immediately with Microsoft. I started consulting for Microsoft, and on the back of a very niche skill that I had at the time. So my previous role, the startup, we were Microsoft partners, so we had access to early technology. So at the time when I graduated, I had a couple of years of experience with the Microsoft technology that they were just releasing on the market. So really, there would have been very few people out there who would have had years of experience with it. So I was able to jump in and do something that there weren't many others who would be. And that would be my next advice for you. Try and get a niche skill. There's two approaches to grow. You can jump on a really large market, so say interaction design or graphic design, and those are like mature markets with a lot of competition. Or you can choose a niche, so a very new technology, or frankly a very old technology as well. Something that you know will not have a large pool of talent out there. And that's a very valid strategy for you to pursue if you're looking to grow quickly. Just evaluate very objectively where the demand for skills will be in a couple of years. Stick to a platform and use that as a rocket. So certainly worked for me, and I've seen it work elsewhere as well, so something for you to consider. So on the back of that project with Microsoft, I worked over a year in an investment bank, helping out with one of their trading platforms. After that year, the investment bank asked me to join them and get on the client side. So I moved on to BNP Paribas at the time, and over the next 5 years I grew the UX team at the place. So my next tip for you, if you're looking to get into management, don't necessarily get on the job application for a UX manager role. You can start a team on your own. So you don't necessarily need to apply for a management role to get into a management position later on. For me, that's actually the best way to get into management, by growing your own team, because the process of growing the team grows you as well as a manager, and you meet the challenges, and you kind of learn the skills on the go. So that's, I think, a fantastic way to get into it, and something for you to consider when if you're looking for growth opportunities. Maybe you start with a company that has no designers, but if you believe the company will grow, or the design impact throughout that company will grow, and there's a capacity for a team in the coming years, then that's a really good place for you to be in. So certainly don't discount organizations without design maturity. That's, I think, actually an opportunity. So a good stint at BNP Paribas. I had great fun designing the UX offering there and evangelizing the organization on design. Towards the end, the same thing happened as at Telerik. I had a pretty large team, a lot of politics, a lot of administration and head over. So I wanted to restart again, and I moved to a different bank doing just a regular designer job. Sadly, after a year there, my boss resigned, and she asked me to take over the department. So I was literally in the same role at Deutsche Bank, again heading the UX design team there. And very shortly, I had the same challenges. So a lot of administration, a lot of politics, not what I'm passionate about. And then I left again for my current role in a hedge fund, which is incredibly tiny. It's like 120 people. And I doubt they will ever have a second designer, because just the work is not there. So there's no risk for me to managing anymore. And I'm just doing hands-on design, which I absolutely love. So that's my next tip for you. You have to really know what you want. There's a prestige and the luster that goes with the head of UX and UX management role. There are some incredibly interesting challenges in that, and I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunities I've had through the years. But it's also not something that's objectively better than being a creative designer. You can grow as a designer, as an expert, as a creative, without that management responsibility as well. So have a look at the management aspect of design objectively, know all the frustrations that go with it, and then decide whether that's you. You can grow outside management as well. So that's kind of my tips from my own experience. Like I said, please discount with a grain of salt. Everything I've said only applies to myself. A few tips on your journey. We'll cover briefly my tips on how to become a manager, if that's your thing. Once you're there, how do you get to be a good manager? That's a different skill. Sadly, sometimes the two are misaligned. And then hopefully I'll have a few words on how to enjoy it as well. Right, becoming a manager, I think you need two things. You need to build the skills, but even if you have the skills, there's plenty of talent out there. You need to have the opportunity to be seen, to have those skills shine through, and hopefully the two, when those two conditions are met, you get rewarded. Building the skills, I think there's two broad skills bases that I see are needed for UX management. First, hands-on design skills. You do need to be a designer. And then more of the soft skills, so the management skills. Let's focus on the design skills. And to me, the design skills that will propel you into management are slightly different from the design skills that will propel you into a design, purely creative career. So to me, less than half is actual design skills. So the makings and the doings of like interaction or research. And almost as importantly to me to become a manager is your skill to innovate. Because there will be quite a lot of good designers in the team. What will set you apart from others is coming up with new process, coming up with new ideas, coming up with something that's fresh. Just producing like solid, good design is not necessarily enough to make you stand out from others on your team. So really focus to me on innovation, coming up, pushing the boundaries, delivering more in new ways. And that's what will start setting you apart from others, not just like excelling at the things that are already being done. And then even if you're incredibly good, unless you communicate your successes, you will not have that personal brand to grow within your organization. So communication, I would say, is incredibly important if you want to get onto on the management ladder. You just can't afford to lose the good designs and shelve them within the design team. You have to shine through. So those are kind of the things you need to be thinking if you're designing to be a manager. Not just good design, but innovative design, and then communicate it well. And then your soft skills, so the management side of things. Have a bit of advice on what to do and what not to do. Certainly all the textbook advice like team play, cooperation, leadership, those are things you have to do, and you have to breathe, and you have to, I think, really believe in those values rather than just do them. But my advice is to do those things broadly within your own team or within that part of the organization that you know well. If you show leadership outside your own team, you might be stepping on someone's toes. You might be getting into a political environment where you don't really understand the actors, or you might be creating enemies pretty quick. So my advice, show leadership and show initiative, and be very active within your design team or within your immediate surroundings, wherever you feel you understand all the actors and all the context. And outside of that, I would say don't be too pushy. Being too pushy can be seen as an aggressive drawback, and it can attract enemies rather than friends. So really, it's common sense, and different things work in different environments. But my advice on what's worked well for me is to be proactive only within the part of the organization that I feel very safe in. So certainly something to consider. So hopefully you've built the skills. Now you need to find the opportunity to shine through and expose those skills to get that job. 3 ways I think are the main venues for me to grow as a manager. First, you have to start. First, you can start a brand new team. So, kind of what I did in BNP Paribas. Find an organization without the design maturity, or a brand new organization, and then be the first there to grow a team. To me, that's the best way to really do it. You get to shape the whole department, so your own processes, your own hires. You really have the opportunity to leave a mark on the organization and shape it fully. So a lot of challenges on the other side. You're on your own, so it can be a very lonely place in the beginning. And then it's a very political role as well, where you have to grow a design practice. So it's almost like a startup within the organization, where you have to evangelize. You have to do a lot of networking with all the stakeholders and all the decision makers to highlight the value of design. That's something that I'm sure every one of you already does, but within a new organization without the design maturity, there's reasons why there hasn't been a designer before. So you are likely fighting some legacy systems within the organization. So a lot of rewards and a lot of opportunity there, but some challenges as well. The other path to management, grow within your team. That's what likely happens to the that's what I would call the regular design growth. So you start with a junior role and then you slowly grow to a management role. Fantastic for learning, fantastic to have the exposure to mentors and to a department with expertise, but it can be quite slow, and at the same time you are really stuck with the resources that have already been there and with the processes that have been defined for that department. Of course, as a manager, you have the leeway to change things, but if it's already a department that's been shaped and the organization is already working with it, there's only so much you can do. So some different challenges there. The bit that I find least likely to happen is to win a lead role externally. So just apply for a UX lead elsewhere. It's also something that I would think seriously before undertaking such a challenge. So going into an organization without understanding the culture, without understanding the specific challenges and the users for that organization sometimes as well, you can do a lot of mistakes. So to me, that's very dangerous. It needs to be approached very carefully. It's certainly the fastest way to get into a management role, but without the corporate and political background knowledge, you have to thread very carefully to make sure that the solutions you bring in from the outside would really work well for that environment, because there are no ready-made solutions. You have to come up with different approaches for different environments. So certainly a lot of danger here, certainly very fast and a lot of opportunity, but something to beware. Okay, so hopefully you've had the skills, you've had the opportunity, and you've become a manager. So what does it take to be a good manager? Sadly, like I said, those are different things from becoming a manager. So some people become managers, they're not so good at it. It's an interesting dichotomy there. But with those few tips, you should have both skills. So what does UX management actually involve? The hands-on element of UX management is first, first make sure that the quality of the design work from everyone on the team meets your standards or those of your organizations. Then you have to really push everyone and push their own capacity. So they provide inspiration for the team, and it can be through personal example, it can be through workshops, it can be through your personal development work with them, but you will be the one pushing others for inspiration, for stretching their limits. And then lastly, at least for me, it's incredibly important to do the personal design work. So being a manager doesn't mean you're not a designer. I've always been very hands-on, and to me that's the joy and the very important tool in the management as well. I think you being a designer, you first understand the challenges others on your team are facing, but also you provide an example which is hopefully inspirational. And then the other aspect of UX management, the administrative one, a lot of forms to fill in, a lot of HR and regulatory tasks, and then communication with external stakeholders. So the evangelization, the making sure that politics work within the departments you work with, that takes up time. And then team management, so motivating your team and making sure that each of your team members has a personal growth plan and they feel rewarded and feel comfortable within their role. So that's kind of what you do as a manager. How do you do it well? To me, a few skills there. First, the people skills. And that is probably one of the most important parts for me in being a good UX manager. How do you manage, and sometimes that means getting people to do what you think is best, when those people are very sensitive, creative. We all know, we are all designers, we know we're well, let's say sensitive people. And the bit that really strikes me as the big win here, and my biggest advice is try and bring subjectivity out of it. Try and manage people objectively and democratically. So what I mean by that, whenever you have a designer discussion, so you're critiquing someone and it's your opinion versus theirs, that's a very subjective conversation, isn't it? I like this design, I don't like it, who's right? You as a manager don't necessarily have that moral or professional standing to say, well, my opinion is more valid than yours. You're both designers. So what I do is always critique in a group. So you bring in the whole team, and then you provide feedback as a team. And that makes things very democratic and very objective. And then any sensitivity is taken out of the process, because you see, I think when you get feedback and it's not personal, it's much easier to stomach. And also you validate it, because it's not just one person against your opinion, it's a group of people, and then you trust them a little bit more. So that's my number one tip for you on people skills. How do you manage designers? Don't manage them on your own. Get your team behind you and manage collectively as a team, and that brings the subjectivity out of the process and makes it much more palatable to designers. And also it stops you from making mistakes, because sometimes you might not like a design, which is actually good. So that's just, I think, a win-win on every level. The other thing you need to pay special attention to is personal growth. So really speak with every member of your team on a regular basis on where they want to get to, what are their aspirations in terms of creativity, career growth, and that's just the basic for people management. That's what you have to do when you manage anyone, whether a designer or somebody else. So that's on the people skills. And then on the organizational skills, so how do you promote your design team within the organization? And I say my advice here is just be a designer. So apply the same UX process we do on our projects, but think of your design team as a service and apply that process to that service. So know your clients, as in know, am I delivering value to my developers, to my business leaders, to who else on the organization? Do a persona on them. What do they need? That might be very different from my own priorities, from my own ways of interpreting the role of design. So when you get under the skin of your clients, well, then you know the process. We've all done the research, then the interaction design, but you can actively design your team as a service using the very processes that we use in our design methodologies. And that's something I think very few places have done, to approach your design team as a design project on its own. And something that I think produces great results, just encouraging you to think in terms of your users. So certainly something for you to consider. And then the other thing you need to know is your ego. So making that difference between what the organization needs from you as a design team and what your own priorities are. I think we all have that passion on creativity and on design, so we always want to do like that new technology or that sexy new design process. That's not always what's needed for the organization, and you have to strike the right balance. As a design team lead, you do have to jump the organization. You have to point in the direction of new technologies. Innovation, like I said, is incredibly important. But then you never have to forget that you are there to deliver value as well. So by knowing what your clients want and also knowing what you want, I think you can marry those two. And there has to be a compromise between conceptual design for innovation and then something that works for the organization. So certainly once you word those things out, you make more informed choices. And then the last thing you need as a UX manager is just, well, all the things that you do as a designer. So how do you promote your own design creative side? To me, the advice I have for you as managers is focus on the research side of things. So as a manager, I've always tried to be there, hands-on involved with the research part of a project. That gives me the context to critique the project throughout the full process of the UX design. If I haven't been there during the research, then my opinion later on the wireframes and on the visual designs will be much less informed and much less relevant. So I try try to kind of, if I can't really get hands-on involved with all the projects, at least with the research side of things. That would be my advice. And then focus on innovation. So focus on coming up with new processes, restructuring the way you work, the design process, or just coming up with new designs. Those are the things that I would suggest you use as a means to advance your own creativity. And so, hopefully, you've made it to the management, you are a good manager. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're enjoying it. How can you do that? Well, to me, you have to ask, those are the challenges that I would urge each of you to think and consider whether design management is for you. The administrative side of things of management is considerable. So normally when you get up to like above 5 or 6 resources, I find out maybe 20–30% of my time is spent on administration. So the creativity that comes with management is different from the creativity that comes with the design role. You are exposed to, it's not hands-on, so you're not doing that much of the work yourself, but you are exposed to everyone else's work. And it's kind of like short bursts of intense creativity, and you're not doing it yourself, you're being exposed to it by others, but it is a very creative process, and you have to provide meaningful critique to that, and you have to provide meaningful support for each of your designers. So in a way, you do have exposure to a lot more creative questions, a lot more creative challenges. It's just not your own ones. So it's different, but I'd say very creative still. Also, you get the best and the worst of the design tasks. So as a manager, you often have the involvement with the architecture and the system design. So as a manager, I've overseen perhaps like 10, 15 projects. The work on the individual work will be done by designers, but I would get involved with the actual integration between the projects, so designing the architecture and the system that makes all of those, well, the service design that brings all of those together. So that's quite interesting. But at the same time, I would be doing all the, can you do this banner for tonight? Or someone's on holiday, you have to cover for them. So there's a lot of like really interesting pieces of work as a manager, but also very boring. So you kind of cover both of those. There's that bit. If you're a designer, you're completely free and you're expected to suggest unworkable things. As a manager, you have to focus on the business value. So you're the one saying, that's great, but we can't do it. And so you have to have that discipline. There's a lot of pain around stress factors, conflict resolution, administrative tasks. So people management is always tricky, and you will have conflict. That's something you have to consider as a downside. And then the self-motivation and drive as well. Being a manager, likely your manager is a senior manager. And senior managers, you will find out, expect that their managers manage themselves and their teams. So that's been my experience at least, but you will not get the support and the personal growth that you get on lower levels of the organization. So you have to actively think for yourself, because chances are your boss will be too busy with senior decision making to really focus on your own motivation. So that's kind of my tips. If you recognize yourself in this, then hopefully I haven't discouraged too many people. I've hopefully painted the great picture of opportunities and drawbacks to management. There's a lot in it, and I would certainly encourage all of you to try. I think hopefully we've highlighted some of the ways you can do that, but certainly, like I said, treat that with caution and craft your own journey. Any questions?